take a look and then get out. If you do open this, it's a CSV file. If it doesn't open with Excel, you can always ask it to. So if it didn't open with Excel, you can right click and say open with. You can choose Excel or you can choose Notepad. If you look at it in Notepad, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. The first number, that's the point number. Then there's the northing, comma, see the easting, comma, the elevation, comma, excuse me, and then the description. If you open it in Excel, you'll see columns. And there's no headings. So you have to know the point file format, right? Notice there's no title. It doesn't tell you that's the point number. It doesn't know anything that's easting. So you have to know the file format. If you don't know the file format, then you can run into problems. Okay? There are many file formats. The one we're going to use is always going to be this one here. Okay? In AutoCAD, if you want to see different file formats, I'll show you. Back to AutoCAD. In AutoCAD, in settings, under point, under where is it? Point file formats. You can see all these different file formats. The one we're going to use is PNEZD with a comma. That's the only one. There are many, and you can create your own. You can create your own styles, right? But that's the only one we're going to use. So make a mental note. If you ever get point data files from me for this course, or even next semester when we do MED, it will always be in this file format. Okay? Point number, northing, easting, elevation, description. So make a note of that. All right. So I want to import the points. Okay? When you import the points, lots of things can happen. Okay? There's some fundamental stuff, importing points, and then there's some information that you can actually use the software and leverage to do some organizing of the files. So this first part is really about data management. Okay? How do I organize the drawing? How do I categorize things so that they make sense and they're not all thrown in one box? Okay, so I don't want to mix it. Let me import the points. If you don't do anything, okay? If you don't set up anything, okay? And you can see what I'm talking about. So this is how you import points. This is actually function number 4, but I don't want you to do that until you prepare 1, 2, and 3 first. So let me do that, and then I can speak to 1, 2, and 3 and why they're important, why you want to organize yourself with description keys, point and label styles, and groups. Okay, so let me just import the points. So I'll skip those just to show you what happens if you don't. So if you go to points, again, the pull-down menu, if it's not there, you can go, if it's hidden, you can go next to Civil 3D. The next little menu, second from the bottom, is to show the menu bar. I work not exclusively, but I do use the pull-down menus a lot because I learned a long time ago on AutoCAD. The ribbon is new. We didn't have this when I was learning AutoCAD. So I tend to work from the pull-down, but there's more than one way to do everything, right? So if I go to points, create points from the pull-down menu, you get this dialog box. Okay, and if you don't like that, well, you can go to the ribbon, to the home tab, and if you go to points, point creation tools, it's got a different name, same function. Okay, so there's many ways to do the same thing. There's at least 2 ways to do anything. Probably more than that. Okay, so but I probably will demonstrate a lot from the pull down. It's kind of a classic setup that I'm used to. So if I go to points and create points, the last button on the end here is for importing points. So here's how you import points. This is actually document number 4. But don't do this yet because there's a lot of setup you want to do before, and you'll see why. So first thing you want to do is in the where this white space is on the top of the screen, you want to hit that plus button, navigate to the directory. So again, go to your desktop, Civil 3D 543, go to your downloads, go to module 1, and if you don't see the CSV files because the file type might be set to XYZ or it might be set to PNT, there's many different file types. These are all just text files. Okay? The type I gave you is a CSV, comma separated value. So if you change the file type to CSV or you change it to all, any file type, then you'll see that you should see all the files. Okay, so that it's not confusing and it's easy to isolate. I usually change the file type to CSV because I know that's what I'm looking for. So there it is. So what you would see there is topo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whichever one you can. Remember, delete the others. So when I say open, it shows up here. And there's the file. Notice it's got a warning, and it's warning me because I have the file open. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to get out of this file, so I'm going to close it. Remember, I opened it to show you what's inside. So again, plus sign, CSV, say open. Now that warning's got, it says you're good to go. Then, this is the critical part. In this next white space, you have to choose the file format. Okay? And this comes from that list that I showed you, tool space settings. It's near the bottom. Always go, and it's the last one at the bottom. Okay? But please be careful. Please be careful. Use this file format. PNEZD, comma, delimited. You can see it's spelled out, comma, delimited. Okay? The big mistake students make is to choose this one. Point number easting northing instead of northing easting. It switches the x's and y's. Okay? So it's confusing. See the easting here is 2500. If I pick this one, now the northing is 2500. So it needs to know which column represents the northing, which column represents the easting. The quick rule in this course is it's the last one at the bottom. Maybe just be careful, it may not be. So now I know where my data is coming from. I know the file format for that data. Ready to go. And it gives you a bit of a preview here. Right? Point number, northern, eastern, northern, screen. But it's hard to tell just by looking at the numbers, which is the northern, which is the eastern. So just pay particular attention to this. That's all you want to do at this point. When you say OK, it'll import the points. So I'm going to do that. Please do not do this. It's not ready to happen, but I want to show you what you get if you don't spend some time to manage your drawing. Okay? So I'm going to bring it in. Zoom. So once it comes in, you probably won't see anything. Okay, so it's done. Now you don't see anything. Z, enter, E, extends, enter. Z, enter, E, enter, and it'll zoom to everything drawn. So that's what you should see when you import your points, that kind of pattern. Okay. Now at a glance, it's kind of hard to tell what's what. You can kind of see some patterns. There's kind of this rectangular shape around the middle. There's kind of some stuff going on in the center here. You want to explore and find out, what all these points represent. You remember they had different descriptions. So if you zoom in, you might see some information. So this one here, if I just pull it away, oh, that's the center line, maybe of a road. This one here, oh, that looks like EOP, edge of pavement. Maybe this one here. Let's just say, oh, it's a shoulder. Okay? So it looks like I've got a rural road, center, pavement, shoulder. Okay, I want to isolate. I want to look at just the layer. I just want to look at just the points that are for the center line. So if I go to isolate that layer, if I go to pick the center line, it isolates the entire layer. Okay, this is a layer control function. It turns out that if I turn off the layer, any one of those points, I say yes, all the points are on one layer, which is not a very useful situation to be in. Okay? The points have different descriptions. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could put them on different layers? And there's a function for doing that. And that's the first thing you want to do or set up your drawing. So you want to make sure points of similar or same description are on the same layer. So we're going to categorize the points using AutoCAD layers. What layer should it be on? Well, if your description is centerline, go on a layer called centerline. If your description is edge of pavement, I want to put that on a layer called edge of pavement. If your description is tree, I want to put you on a layer called tree. And then you can isolate the various layers and kind of start looking at patterns and how things are set up. Okay? When they're all on one layer, it's not a very useful thing, not a very useful setting. Okay? So the first thing we're going to look at is what's called description keys. Description keys, and I'm going to use the word, everybody, nobody run away or get upset. Description keys is really programming. The interface you use to program is a lot easier than anybody who's done any programming, like C++ or even BASIC. It's not that type of programming. It's just setting up some settings. The background is programming, but the interface you do it in is actually quite easy. Okay? So here's what this file looks like, this PDF. It explains how to create a description key. So if you look at this, I've got text, and I've got, can everybody see the PDF? 2, 3 yeses, please. Chat. Yeah, you can see, okay, good. Disappeared, sorry. Oops. So if you, the description key has step-by-step instructions on how to perform perform this task many times, okay? But at least you have an example of what's going on here. And it shows you a screen capture of where to look for it, and I've even got these little red ellipses here pointing exactly where to go. Okay, so these are step-by-step instructions on how to do stuff. It's not step-by-step instructions on the assignment. But if you have to perform this task, here's an example. Okay, so that's how these documents should be used. They are reference guides. They're not step-by-step instructions. Okay, what you did in Highways as an introduction was pretty much just follow the steps. Now you kind of have to go to these reference documents, figure out how to do stuff, and then actually go and do it. Okay, so that's a little different. And hopefully with the experience you've got so far with everything else you did in Highways, excuse me, this shouldn't be too difficult. So it tells you import points from a text file and organize points representing similar types of information, so we can make use of what's called a description key set. Okay, so what you want to do with the description key set is program it with a set of instructions that says, okay, if this is your description, this is the layer you go on when I import. If this is your description, you should be on this layer. If that's your description, you should go on that layer. So that's what this function does. Okay? So I'm not going to go through the document. Okay? It's there. It's a couple of pages. I'm just going to do a couple, and I'll show you the result. Okay? So back to AutoCAD. Sorry. So here's that. So I'm going to erase these. Okay? So don't do that. That's not a good way to start. You want to set up your description keys. Set up your description keys, and again, I'm doing this from memory because I've done it many times. But if again, you have this video, you have that PDF document as reference. So plenty of reference material to use to do this thing. So you need your tool space. You need to go to settings, and then in settings for this file, you need to go to point, and then there's something called description keys. Okay. Now I've already created the one you need to do, but I'm going to show you a couple. Now what are you programming? This is where you need to explore the data you're provided. That's why you want to open up that CSV file. So here's a couple of hints about using that CSV file. So I'm going to open this up using Excel. Because Excel has a few more tools than Notepad. So I'm going to open this with Excel. Okay, and then I'm going to put a filter on this. So that I can look at it. So filter. And then when I open this up, it shows me the different things. Now it's a short list. There are almost 3,000 points. But as far as descriptions go, this is your list. So there are descriptions called TCL, T in bank, TEOP. The T stands for topographical point, and then dash whatever it is, what the point represents. So this is the center line. It doesn't have to be a road. It could be a center line of a ditch and so on. So there's so many different things. I have a standard for topographical information. The company or companies you work for or deal with when you get out into industry, they will have their own set of standards, their own set of descriptions for points. And when you work with those companies or work within the division of your company, this will already be done. So the description key programming you have to do, you're going to learn it in this course, but unless you're more involved on the CAD side of projects versus the design side of projects, you'll probably use description keys more often than creating them. The creating and the managing is more of a CAD management responsibility, but if you're a draftsperson or a designer, you'll be using these things. Whether you're using them or creating them, it's important to understand what they are. So in this course, at the beginning, I'm going to treat you more like a CAD manager type person. These are the types of things that need to be created. Okay? You may never be involved in creating them in your career, but certainly if you create them, then you'll certainly understand what they are, and then you can use them effectively. Right? So you could have a description key for different companies. Survey company ABC has this description. Well, let's program it once and for all, so that when we get their stuff, we can import it quickly into a drawing and make sure that everything's on our layers, so we have our standard. Company QXR, they have a different naming convention for their descriptions. Okay, so I'll create a description key for that company so that I can import their descriptions onto our layers, and so on. So you could always create a standard drawing for your company from various sources. Okay, so that's the point of this. So if you use this technique, if you look at the file, you can quickly see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different descriptions. So you have to do 10 lines of programming. I'm going to do a couple, and then we'll see what the effect is. Okay. So again, if you go into this file, close it without saving. Please do not save. Don't change it, or it won't import properly. If you screw that file up, you can always download it again from that zip file. Any questions so far? If you're typing a question, keep going, and then I will stop to answer. So the description key, here's how you create it. In your drawing, if you go there, there's nothing there. So this would be blank. It would just be, it would look like this. There would be no little plus sign. You couldn't expand it. To create a description key, you right-click and you say new. And you give it a name. I'm going to call this temp because I already have the name that I want you to use, which is the document. The name really doesn't matter, but the more descriptive it is, the better. So I've asked you to create one called point input. Okay? But here's how you do the work. So once you create it, then you go to edit the keys, and you get this dialog box. So now there's only 4 columns you need to concern yourself for this course. New key. So what's the code? This is the text that's in the file. So remember T-centerline was, dash. Centerline was one of the descriptions. Well, if I type the code, and then I put an asterisk at the beginning, an asterisk at the end, it'll capture any text string that has those 4 letters. And sometimes, I can't remember, each version changes a little bit. It may be case sensitive, so be careful, uppercase, lowercase. Okay? I believe all the descriptions in the file are uppercase. So that's the course code. This is the description in the CSV file. Okay? Then I want to put it on the layer, and if you go into the if you want to pick a layer, you click in this blue X, right? So you turn the layer function on, and then you click in here, and it brings this dialog box up. And now you get to choose the layer. Now, if the layer you want doesn't exist, you have to create it. Okay? So I'm looking for a layer called P-centerline. If that layer doesn't exist, if it's not already in the drawing, then you can use the new command to create it. Right? Give it a name, change colors and line types and so on. Okay? You can always do that later. It's the name that's important. So if your description is T-centerline, I want to put you on a layer called P-centerline. My company standard wants a P at the front for the layer name. So in the CSV, there are a lot of layers. Control that. Yeah, you could. They're usually in alphabetical order. So the first column code, that's the description in the CSV file. In the layer, that's the layer you want those points to go on. Okay? So if your description is T-CL, I want you to go on a layer called P-CL. Okay? And that's all the function does. So you're going to have 10 lines of code. Another one was edge of paper, remember? So in here. Now to create another line, you can't just click in here. To create another line, you have to right-click and say new. Nothing stupid. That's the way it works. So let me say T-EOP. Remember edge of pavement? I like to put the asterisk at the beginning and the end. In case there's, like, suppose it's indexed. Suppose it's centerline point 1, centerline point 2, centerline point 3. I can put them all on one layer. As long as it says CL, and then the asterisk takes care of any character after that. Okay, so that's why the asterisk is used. It's a wild card. Okay, then choose the layer and find it. Again, if it's not on the list, you can use this button here to create the layer. So I'm going to use P-EOP. That's the layer. So if your description is T-EOP, then you go on the layer called T-EOP. You go on a layer called P-EOP. So those are the 2 columns you need to concern yourself with. Make sure you put in the code with the asterisk at the beginning and at the end, and make sure you put the layer name. If it starts with a T in the file, you want the layer to begin with a P, because my company standard is to put points on P- layers, even though the surveyor has T- for topo. Last thing you want to do is make sure that the style and the point label style, these 2 things are on. So make sure these are both on. For style, make sure they're on. For point label style, make sure they're on, set to default. Okay, I'll talk more about what that does and what that means when we get into point groups. Okay, so stay tuned for that. So if you take the time to do all that programming, and in this case here, spelling counts. If you type it in wrong, remember what I did at the beginning? I put an underscore underscore by mistake. Right? If you put an underscore instead of a dash, it won't recognize that. If the instruction is not here, so if you don't program this, any point that doesn't fall into this category by default will go on the current layer. In this case, layer 0. So whatever the current layer is. That's why they were all on one layer. They were all on the current layer. So this set of instruction is very useful for taking points of like descriptions and putting them on the same layer. Okay. So let me do this. So I'm not going to program all of it. I've already done this, right? So like a cooking show, right? I've got one. I'm showing you one turkey. I'm going to pull the other one out of the oven. Already cooked. Okay. That's how you create it. But I'm going to use this point import function. Okay. So this is already programmed. Let me show it to you. Edit the keys. So I've got Alt. Okay. Again, T dash descriptions go on the P dash layer. Make sure the style and the point styles are all on. Is it better to import points first or make the description key first? You can apply the description key after you import them, but I find the best practice is to make sure that when you're importing, the description key function is already set. So when you import, they're already on the right layer, as opposed to applying it after. So I recommend you create the description key and then import your points and make sure that the point description keys are working. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to go back to my import points. You remember points, import, create points, import points. When you import points now, again you have to choose the file name and so on. But before we do that, I'm going to go back. Some settings in point creation. A couple of things to be mindful of. This is covered in the 4th PDF. Okay, remember I'm on the 1st PDF right now, right? PDF 1, 2, 3. This is the 4th function. This is covered in detail during that time, but I'm going to show it to you now because it's important. When we create points, you want to make sure that the language is terrible. See, it says disable description keys, and it says true. That means if this says true, the description key is disabled. So during any function, description keys won't work, right? Because we're saying true to disable. The language is backwards. What you want to do is make sure this says false. We do not want to disable the description key. So the language is kind of funny. Instead of disable description, it should just say description key, and then where it says false, it should say enable or disable. So the language is kind of silly. That's how it works. So if you want the description key function to perform, you have to set this to false. Okay, so that's the one thing to be mindful of. More about this during the import when we actually get to step number 4. Okay, we're still in step 1. So if I go to import now, and I choose that file name, and I choose the correct format, I say OK. It's going to import the points. It takes a minute or a second there until we get the cursor back. So now it's actually applying that set of instructions. So if we go here, you'll see everything. So if I isolate the center line of the road, if I find one, there's T center line. If I take that, now here's another thing about the default setting. There's 50 tangents, unfortunately. If I want to isolate that layer, I want the other layers to turn off. The default setting is not that. So if you go to isolate, this button here, and you pick that, before you hit enter, go down to the bottom where it says settings, choose the settings, and make sure it says off. By default, it may say lock and fade. So if it says lock and fade, then make sure that you change that before you hit enter. So let's do it again. Isolate layer, pick the layer you want, make sure in settings it's set to off, not lock and fade. You want off. You want all the other layers off. Okay, and then you hit enter, and it'll turn the other layers that you didn't select off. So if you do that, now you'll see all the centerline layers are on a layer called P-centerline. So this is a much better way of organizing the data, the point data, using just AutoCAD layers. So depending on the layer, so now you can quickly see these are the centerline of road. Oh yeah, there's a road that goes all the way around this property. Let's take a look. Find something here. Oh, these are the trees. This is a tree. Okay, so we're going to isolate the layer tree. Oh, now I can see where all the trees are. You couldn't do that if the points were all on the same layer. Okay, so that's the power of this description key. And that's basically all it does. Now, it sounds like a simple thing, but if you had to go through your CSV file, take all the trees, put them on in their own file, and take all the center lines, put them in their own CSV file, and put have a CSV for each description, and then set the current layer. It'll come in on the tree layer. Set the CL layer. It'll come in. You could get away with not using the description keys, but it's certainly a handy function to have. Okay, so does everybody understand what description keys are and what they do? So again, let's show you how to do one. Let's go back to it. This is a guide. Remember? Go to your tool space. Go to the settings tab. Go to descriptions key. Right click. Hit new. That's all spelled in here. Good question. I'll get to that, Trump, in a minute. So then hit new, then right click on the one you just created, edit the keys, and then from your Topo CSV file, make sure you type in the code, turn the style and the point label style defaults on, and then choose the layer. The description is T-, that's in the CSV file, the layer name is P- or the same. Okay, so this is an example of how you do one. You have to create a line of code for every description you're attempting. Okay, so I'll leave that up to you. Back to Trom's question. Yes, so if there's more than one description key, so I have two here, it'll always look for a description key. So if one description is in here, if there's a description key missing in this one, it'll go to the next one. And it'll go through the entire list until that description doesn't exist anywhere. And then it'll just put it on the current layer. So it's a series of them. Okay, they're sets. But if you want to make sure that it uses this description key first before this one, you right click on description keys, you go to properties, and then you make sure that the list has a certain order. So if you want this one used first, it has to be at the top of the list. If you want this one used first, then using the arrow, you put it at the top of the list. So when you import, it looks for the description key functions in temp first, and then once it's exhausted all that, if there's a point that has no category, it goes to the next set. And then if it's not there, it'll go to the default. So you could have 10 of them. If you're not in the first one, are you in the second one? No. Are you in the third one? No. Are you in the fourth one? No. Are you in any of them? No. Okay, then just put them on the default as the current layer. Okay, so you want that at the top. You won't have two. You only have one. So this isn't really that important, but that's a good question if you have more than one description. So you need to be mindful if you're importing two different companies. Before you import, make sure you put that company name at the top, and it uses that one first. Okay. So that's description keys. Any other questions about description keys? So for your assignment, next Friday, you have to program the description keys before you import, and you've got your points all organized. Okay. The next thing, if we look at that list of PDFs, is point and point label styles. I'm going to go back to my point labels and label styles. Again, I'm going to teach you the classic point label style, but there are many variations of this. Can you see my whiteboard, my hand? Okay, thank you. So remember the point format, P, N, E, Z, D. That's your standard format. There are others, but that's the only one we're going to use. To represent that in the drawing, okay, and you've all taken GIS. Has everybody taken a GIS course? By now, I hope. Yeah. Okay. So Civil 3D does have a GIS database working in the background, and you'll see it when you create the point data and surfaces and so on. Okay? But when it comes to points, it's a kind of a classic thing. A lot of software that uses points uses a similar kind of setup. So for the point data, point number, northern, eastern elevation description, we want to bring in the point object. So it's the graphical representation of the point. The graphical representation of the point has two parts to it. There's the point itself, and the classic look for a point is this mark, this X. And the location of that, the insertion point, is actually the northern and the eastern. So that is located spatially wherever the northern and eastern is telling you it should be. Okay? So that's what's called the marker. Apologize for the handwriting. Marker. So that's the marker. You can have many styles for the marker. Okay? So it could look like an X, it could look like a dot, it could look like a cross, it could look like a circle, it could look like a cross with a circle combined. There's many different things you can use as a marker to mark the spot of northing and easting. You can use AutoCAD point styles, or you can use Civil 3D objects. Okay, so Civil 3D has different marker styles. I'll show you what they are. Okay, so just understand that in the plan, you can represent the location of the point, where the northing and the easting is by different things, different marker styles. These are all different style types, right? Another thing you can use is blocks, right? So if you have a maintenance hole, you can have a block for a maintenance hole. You can have a block for a catch basin. You can have a block for a tree. That's the insertion point and so on. So you can actually use many, many things to create markers. What does the point look like, right? And if you use some clever point markers, you can do a lot of drafting for free. Okay? And I'll show you what that looks like. So that's the first thing, the style for the marker. The other thing we look at is the label style. So this is the point style. This is the label style. And sometimes called the point label style. Sometimes they drop the word point, but label style for the point. What does that mean? Well, once you mark the spot with the marker, then you can annotate it. The classic, the basic one you'll always see is a label that shows three things. The point number, the elevation, and the description. This is classic surveying information. Right? So the northing and easting, you don't see the values. It just plots the point in the right spot, and it makes it look like whatever marker style you've assigned. And then it puts in a label. The label for the point, this information comes from a database created from point number, elevation, description. They are representing the same thing. If you change any of these things in the database, this will automatically react. They're linked, right? So if you change the data, if you go in and change the information, if you type different information in the database, you'll see this thing react. If you type in a different easting, you'll see the point move. If you type in a different northing, you'll see the point move. If you change the point number, you'll see the point number here. If you change the elevation, you'll see this update and so on. So this is a graphical representation of this database. Okay? And again, based on the description, we can apply certain markers. Right? A tree should look like a tree, a maintenance hole might look like a maintenance hole, a catch basin might want to look like a catch basin. And at the same time, there's certain information we want to show about it. What's the elevation of that point? What's the description of that thing? What's the point number? Okay? So we can create styles for what the point looks like, the marker, and we can create style for the label. The labels, there's infinite different things you can do with this. Right? I don't have to show the point number, just the elevation and the description. I don't have to show the description of the point number, I can show just the elevation and so on. So we're going to practice creating different styles for the marker and different styles for the label. Okay. Now to do that, there's a document. So let's take a quick look. So this is document number 2, point and label styles. It's actually two. It could be 2 documents, but I put them all in the same file because they're related. How do you create a point style? It walks you through it. This is how you create one style. You have to create many. I'll show you the assignment. Okay, so this is how you create one style, where the settings are. And then this is a label style. How you create a label style. Okay, again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it'll show. You're going to see this when I demonstrate. How do you create a style? How do you create a label style? So this shows you where you create the styles for the marker and where you create the styles for the labels. All right. What you need to know for your for this assignment is the and this isn't posted yet, but I will give you a preview. Assignment 1. I haven't posted this yet, but here it is. You have to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 styles for the marker. Right? So I want a point to look like an X. I want the sanitary maintenance hole to look like this block. I want the storm maintenance hole to look like this block. I want the hydrants to look like this. I want the trees to look like this. So mostly AutoCAD blocks, one of them is a custom marker. And this is the size, and this is the marker layer, and the color. So these are all the settings. So how you do one of these, I'm going to demonstrate. There's an example in the go and do it 5 times, 5 different things. Then point label styles. Here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4 label styles. One label style shows all 3 things: point, number, elevation, description. Another label style shows just the elevation. Another label style, no display, nothing. You're not going to see anything. Okay, so it's a label, but it's blank. And then there's a label style with just the description. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. I want you to create 4 different point label styles. And then you're going to see what we do with them. Okay? So you have to create these styles as the next step. So how do you do that? Well, let me do the first one for you. I want a point style where the custom marker is X, the size is 0.5, and the marker layer is 0, and the color is violet. So how do you do that? Okay, well, let's go back to the drawing. Again. Excuse me. So I'm going to go to, again, I'm going to start right from scratch. So I'm going to go to my tool space. I'm going to leave Prospector. I'm going to go to the Settings tab. I'm going to go to the Point Settings, and I'm going to go to the Point Styles. So usually, by default, there's always one style all ready to go. It's called the standard style, right? So point styles, there's a standard one. Label style, there's one called standard. Table styles, there's one called standard. There's always one ready to go. So the quickest way to get started is to make a copy of the standard one and then modify it. So that's what you're instructed to do as an example in the PDF. So if you go to point styles, let me start that from scratch again. Okay, so bring up your tool space, go to the Settings tab, and go to point styles, and you'll see the standard style. Right click, make a copy. Always start with the standard style. Okay? Go to the Information tab, change the name. This one's called Point. The marker, well, you can use an AutoCAD marker, you can use a custom marker, or you can use a block. Those are the 3 different things. I'm going to use a custom marker for this one. I want the absolute size to be 0.5, and in the Display tab, I want to make sure everything is on layer 0 and color by layer. So the settings that I've asked you for are mostly the default settings. Okay. And when I say OK, well, now you have 2 styles. If you want to create another one, right click on the standard style. Always start with the standard one. Copy this. Make sure you keep a copy of the original standard style. Let's call this one Tree. What's the marker going to look like? Well, the marker is going to look like an AutoCAD block, and if you don't see it on the list, you can scroll over. There's a block called Tree. If that block is not there on the list, it's because you don't have my template file. You screwed up the very first step, step 0. You did not use the template I provided. That's why it's important. You can see the others are there too, Sanitary and Storm. So I'm going to use the tree. And what size should it be? The tree should be size 3. So I'm going to make it 3. And then the display is going to be defaults. 0 file there. And say OK. Alright, so now I have a point style called Point and a point style called Tree. Alright. And so on. How do you create a label style? Well, you go to the label styles, point label styles. There's one called Standard. You right click and you make a copy. And one of the styles I want to create is called point number elevation description. So that's the name, PED with dashes. So I'm going to change the name. Oops. And what are the settings? Well, this is a little more complicated than the marker. There's a lot more going on here. So I want to look at text label. So the first column for point label styles is text label. I want L80. That information is in the General tab. Okay? So that's the style. It's already there. So the standard style already has the proper text style. Okay? But you can choose any text style that's in the drawing. But the default one is what I want you to use. Then I want you to go and change some of the settings for the 3 components. So I'm going to go to Layout. In Layout, you have 3 different components. Number for point number, point elevation, point description. If you want to change the setting for the point number, these are the things you can change about it. If you want to change the ones for point elevation, you have to go to this tab or this tab. Change information. So what do we want to do? Well, for this one, I want the visibility to be true for all 3 pieces. want the height to be 1.5 and the color to be 7. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, I'm going to start with the first one. I want the height to be 1.5, and I want the color to be color 7. Not by layer, by color 7. Okay, so height and color 7. Go to the next one. Height 1.5, color 7. And again, description 1.5, 7. Okay, so now I have all the settings for the style called PED. And now you have another style. Want to create the next one? Right click, edit, copy. I want to do one where it's just the elevation. The text is going to be the same. Let's look at it real quick. So the one called elevation, same text. I only want to see the point elevation, and I want the color for all of them to be, the height to be 1.5, color 1. So again, go to Layout tab. 1.5 for the height. Color should be 1, which is red. Go to the next one. Color should be 1. Text height should be 1.5. And then the last one. 1.5. And the color should be red. But if you look at the style I asked for, I only want to see the point elevation. That's the only visibility that should be true. Okay, so this is another language you need to learn. You know, on layers, you can freeze and thaw for I want to see, I don't want to see layers. Or you can turn them on and off. Well, now there's other things on these objects, these Civil 3D objects, where you can turn the visibility to true or false, which is another visibility setting. Okay, it's just different words for the same thing. I want to turn the number, I don't want to see it, so I'm going to turn the visibility to false. You can see in the preview it disappears. Then I'm going to go to the point description, and I'm going to turn its visibility to false. So now I have a style that just shows the elevation. Okay. So if I apply this style to a point, you'll only see the elevation. If I apply this style, I'll see all three, color, white, and so on. Okay, so that's how you change the different settings. The next thing you'll want to do, and we'll do this later, but if you want to change the decimal place accuracy, you have to go to with a point number, right? So if you want to go to point number, you want to change the decimal place accuracy, you can go to the contents. See where it says text contents? In here, there's a set of instructions. In order to get access to it, you have to hover over here, click once, and then this little button shows up. If you click that, you get the menu. And then if you click here, this is the programming string. I'm going to use that word. Please don't be intimidated by it. But this is the instruction. It tells you the units are in meters. P3 is 3 decimal places, and so on. These are all the settings. If you click on that text string, it shows you what all the different settings are. If I want to change the decimal place accuracy from 3 decimal places to just 2 decimal places, I have to change it here. This is your wish list. This does not take effect unless you hit this arrow right here. I'll talk more about this later when we do lot grading. If I don't click that arrow, it won't write that new set of instructions into this text. See here it says P3, even though I've set it to 2. Watch what happens when I hit the arrow. Now it updates it to 2 decimal places. I want to go back, change it to what I want, and then I have to hit the arrow to make it happen. So now P2, when I hit the arrow, becomes P3. So on. So this arrow here is just confirmation of the changes to the settings that you want to perform. It's a source of frustration if you forget it. You make all your changes and then you hit OK, nothing happens. If you make all your changes and don't hit that arrow button, it's going to be a problem. So if you just click, it won't work. No, it's a real pain. When you're new at this, it's going to happen to you a few times. You're going to learn that lesson over and over again if you don't pay attention. Okay? So it's very important to use that arrow to affect the changes to the program. Okay? I'll talk about this later. It's not required for this assignment, but I just want to show it here. So there's many things you can do with these point descriptions. Okay, so now I have a couple of styles. There's more. You have to create 4 of them. Point styles, I think there's 5. I only created 2 of them. So that's what the different things can look like. So let's go down to a tree here. Okay, here's a tree. If I click on the tree and I type in CH for change properties, I'll get the dialog box for change, which is right here. Let me get rid of my tool space. So you can see the style and and the point label style are set to default. Okay? The word default is a new term introduced for Civil 3D. It really just means it's like by layer, right? So whatever the default setting is, that's what you should look like. But if you want to, instead of having color by layer, you could force it to be a certain color, make it red. So I could force it to be a certain style, tree. Now it looks like a tree. And I don't want to see everything. I want to see just the elevation. So I can force just the elevation. Now I only get the elevation. So now I can quickly change the style of the marker and the style of the label to show just the tree with the elevation of them. Okay? So that's what these different things do. Now, don't do this. I just want you to see what the effect is. This, all of the points that you bring in should not be hard-coded. I don't want to tell it to look like a tree. I want it to say, look like a default. And I want you to look like a default. Okay? What'll happen, just like colors and line types, is depending on what layer you're on, you'll look a certain way. So don't hard code like you do with line. Don't make a line red. Make sure the color is by layer. Don't make a line type dashed. Make sure it's by layer. And then you can change the by layer setting. You can change the layer setting so that all the items on that one layer all look the same. So you can globally change the look of everything. Not one at a time, but the whole layer. Okay? So that's why you want these to be set to default. Okay? More about that when we create the next thing called groups. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So does everybody understand styles? Okay, let's go back to this discussion here. Right? Every point has a marker style, and every point can have a label style. You don't have to label the point, but generally we have both. What does the point look like in Plan? That's the marker. And what information are we showing in the label? Sometimes all three pieces of information, sometimes just one. And then you can format it. Okay? So you can have different colors, you can have different decimal place accuracies. You can actually do math. I've done this in the past. I'll have a marker with an elevation only. And then if I'm drawing, say, in a parking lot, I'm drawing in a parking lot and there's a curb and gutter, right? When you talk about a curb and gutter, they want the elevation of the gutter and they want the elevation of the top of curb. So in the plan view, you always need 2 points. What's this elevation? What's this elevation? So what I've done in the past is I don't put that point in. Here, I actually show the elevation of the pavement, and then I have another elevation of that design point, and I add 15 centimeters to it. So then it can show 2 numbers. One is always 15 centimeters above the other. You can actually program that into the style. Okay, so you can get pretty creative with this. We're not going to get that fancy, but there's a lot you can do with these. And then again, they're all in the name of saving time when you're drafting, right? When you're showing this information. You'll see the power of that as we go through. Any questions about point styles and point label styles? So, I kind of lied. Let me show you what I lied about. If we'll go back to AutoCAD, remember I said don't, if I change the description, don't change the style for the marker and the point label style to anything other than, leave this as default, okay? I don't want to hard code what it should look like. I want this to be the same as the by layer function, okay? What layer are you on? This is what you should look like. This is your marker, this is your label, okay? Now, if you go to your layer control, go to your layer control, you'll see, I don't know why it's not done. For every layer, there is no category across the top of point style and point label style. So AutoCAD does not allow you through the layer manager to apply a point style or a point label style, because there's more than just points on a layer, right? So to assign a point style and a point layer style to a layer really doesn't make sense, because you could have lines, points, text. There's so many different things that could be on the same layer. So it would be great if I could assign the point style and the point label style to a layer. And then thanks to the description key, whatever points are on that layer will have a certain look. Okay? And then that's why you want the default setting to maintain. So really, if I could assign the point style for the marker and the point label style for the point label to each layer, then this, instead of saying default, should say by layer, right? But you can't do it through the layer function, unfortunately. So that's why the language is different. It'd be nice if that said by layer. Oh, go to the layer and tell the layer manager, hey, on this layer, if there's a point, make it look like this, make the label look like this. It doesn't work that way. Layers are strictly for AutoCAD stuff. When you're dealing with points, you have to have a new kind of management system, and that's where point groups come into play. So if you go back to the setting here, you'll see the next thing. So we talked about description keys, points, and point labels. Now I want to talk about point groups. So besides putting points on different layers based on their description, we can actually create groups of points. And those groups could be populated based on that description as well. So just like we put points on different layers based on the description, we could put points in different groups based on the description. And that's the next topic here, point groups. How do you create a group and so on? Okay? And those groups then can have styles assigned to. So for this group, this is what you're going to look like. If you're a member of that group, this is what you're going to look like. So that's what point groups do. They do much more, but that's the basics. How do you create point groups? Again, an example of how to create one point group is in this document. Text and graphics walks you through it. I'm going to do some examples. Okay, so what groups do we want to prepare? Okay, again, I'm going from the assignment. So here are all the point groups you need to create. The point groups are all G dash. That's the name of the point group. Just like a layer name, these are the group names. So I know I created the centerline group, and I know a style for centerline, and I know I created a style. Let's do the tree. Okay, so let's talk about a group called tree. I'm going to create just the one. How do you create a point group? Well, again, you need tool space, and you need to go to point groups. Now, by default, there's always one called all points. These are all the points. And here's that database I was talking about. Remember, this is a GIS database. So if you go to all points, you'll see the point number, the easting, the northing, the point elevation, the description, and so on. There's a little information shown here. Some of it's not being used, but it even tells you what layer it's on based on the point description, on the program description key. So this is your database of the points. Okay. By default, there's always one point group. It's called all points. You can't change the name, can't delete it. Okay. So all the points in this drawing have to belong to one common group. It's the default group. And if you look at the all points group, it has styles assigned to them. Okay, so if you go to the include tab, you'll see everything. All point numbers greater than 0 are a part of this group, and you can't change it. Right? So this captures all the points, and if you're in this group, this is what you look like. You have the standard style for the point style, you have the standard style for the point label style. Okay? Well, I don't want the points all to look the same, so I'm going to create subcategories. Okay? So I'm going to right-click on point groups, create a new one. I'm going to call this one G-tree, G for group. Okay? What do you look like if you're a member of this group? Well, I want to look like a tree for the marker, and I want to show just the elevation. As an example, that's probably not the assignment. Let's take a look. It wants to look like a tree. The point style should be tree, and we want to see just the description. Well, I haven't created that description style yet. I'm just going to use this one. So this is wrong. This is not what to do. But that's the only one I have. So I want to look at just the elevation. Okay, so if you're a member of this group, that's what your style is going to look like for the point style and the point label style. Okay? How do you gain membership into this group? Well, just like a description key, you have to go to this include tab, go to the raw descriptions, type in star T-tree. Oops, star. Now, it's important that you make sure this text string matches exactly what's in that CSV file. Okay? So this is how you gain membership. If this is your description, you're a member of this group. If you're a member of this group, this is what your styles are going to be. And that's why it's important that the actual individual objects in the drawing are set to default. A better word would be by group. Remember with the layer? by color, by group, by layer for color, and by layer for line type. A better word instead of different by group. What's your style? By the group member, and so on. Okay? So that's what. If you remember the group, you'll like it on. So you can globally en masse change. Oh, I want to see all three. Go back to the group properties and change it to the other. So I see number, elevation, description. That'll come up white if you I globally change them all. If you don't want to see the label, you can create that no display label, or you can actually apply no label. Just say none. Now you see just the trees. So you can see how you can globally change your settings for everything. So that's a very handy drafting tool. So imagine you go to work. Your description keys are all programmed. Your layers are all created. The color and line type of those layers is all defined, which we haven't even talked about yet. Your point groups are all ready with all the different styles. Your styles are all been created. When you import the points, you'll see everything on the correct layer, the correct color, with the correct style, with the correct label style. That's a lot of drafting taken care of, so it's pretty quick. So those three items, if we go back, if this, and this has already been created, then all you have to do your design or drafting work is import the points. And then it'll put everything on the correct layer. It'll put everything into the correct group. And by virtue of the layer you're on, you'll get the colors and line types you want. And by virtue of the group you're in, you'll get the styles for the marker and the label that you want. And that's pretty powerful stuff as far as organizing your drawing. And if you have to make any global changes, you just change the layer settings or the group settings. And that's a great way to get started. So if you had to do something quick, and you had a template that had all this already programmed, you can see the power of having description keys, point label and label styles, styles and point label styles and groups ready to go. Okay? But you have to create that. By doing the work, you can appreciate what they are, so that if all you're going to do for the rest of your career is use them, you can at least understand what they are, what they do. So that's the purpose of this. So 1, 2, and 3 generally are already included in the template. But for the purpose of teaching it to you, I didn't include it, so I want you to do all that programming. Okay, does everybody understand? Any questions about that? In the assignment, again, which is not online yet, I'm also going to give you a list of all the layers that are going to be created, what color and what line type they should be. So that's part of the assignment. Okay? So we should set up everything from PDF 1, 2, and 3, then import. Yes. Yeah. Do PDF 1 first, do PDF 2, then do PDF 3, and then import your points. Yeah, that's best practice. I mean, can you do the point? Can you create the groups first? Yes. But when you go to create the groups, again, I'm just trying to be efficient. Cancel. I didn't create all my styles, remember? So if I go here and I right click and I say new, and I create one called P-sanitary maintenance hole, not PG, one of the groups is G sanitary maintenance hole. If I go to that assignment requirement, so if you create one called G sanitary maintenance hole, I want to use a point style called sanitary MH, and I want to see point number, elevation, description. Well, while I'm creating the group, I didn't create that style for the marker yet, right? So it'd be nice if those were all ready before, so that when I create the groups, I can assign them. This one's ready, but the one called sanitary is not done yet. Right? So I suggest you do all your styles first. Yeah, you could, but I don't recommend it. I would do them in the order. Do all of the description key programming, do all of the point styles and point label styles, create all of your groups and assign those styles. You can't assign them if they're not created. And then, okay, so I'm trying to give you best practice. Okay? So we got to show it. 2, 3. Yes, that's right. Only one CSV. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so that takes us to the file management of the point data. styles, creating layers, putting stuff on the correct layer, making sure things look the way they're supposed to. And then, like I said, on the assignment, which I'll probably make available, if not today, tomorrow, it tells you exactly what you need to do. So now we've imported the points. Okay, so I'm going to do everything. Okay, so I've got everything on different layers. Let's look at the centerline layer again. So here's the centerline layer. So there's a centerline layer. It's hard to tell just by looking at the points kind of what the lie of the land is. Right? It'd be nice if I had more than just point data. But besides points, we also have linear features typically, right? Center line of road. It'd be nice if those dots were all connected. Edge of pavement. It'd be nice if those dots were all connected with lines and so on. Okay? Now, usually, not always, but usually a surveyor will provide that information. So if I want to see that information, I could take the time and draw them, right? Turn my O snaps. I could do this if I want. Go to that center line layer. Create a new layer for the line. Change my O snaps to node, so I can click on all the points, and then draw a polyline from node to node to node to node. If you do that, you're fired. There's a better way. Node to node. You could do this if you don't have any other choice, right? That's what you're trying to create. It'd be nice if I had that. Usually surveyors provide that information. It may or may not be in a drawing. Okay? So all we have so far is that CSV file. So we can create that. The nice thing is if the surveyor's done their work and they did their best to be efficient, what they sometimes provide is either an AutoCAD drawing or an AutoCAD DXF. Instead of a DWG file, sometimes you get a DXF, which is a data transfer file, DXF, a transfer file. And it's a very, very basic CAD file. There's not much in it, right? It just has fundamental geometry. So that was provided for this. So if you go back to the Module 1 directory, you'll see this file here, the two-dimensional topo for this project in a DXF file, not a DWG. So we could import that point, we could import that file and have all the plan metrics. So this is typical, not always, but typical. How that stuff is created is a discussion really for surveyors, which I'm not going to get into today, right? But they usually provide these for you, right? And some surveyors actually give you a DWG with the lines and the points already in them. And then the points may or may not be on the layers you want. So it's a bit of a pain, but here it is. So to bring those points, you use to bring those lines in, or that information, I type in I for insert. It's just like inserting a block. So I for insert. And it's not in the drawing, so I have to navigate to where that file is stored. So I use this button here, I believe. Dialog box for external files. So now I go to my desktop, under the course code directory, under downloads, under module 1. And if you don't see it, you have to change the file type. It's not a DWG, it's a DXF. Again, DXF stands for data transfer file. You click on it and say open. Okay. Now before you actually import the stuff, you have to be mindful of a standard position for this information. Everything needs to be geo-referenced. You have to be using the same coordinate system and so on. So there's three things you always look for, or we're going to use as the default. I'm going to go back to here. When you bring it in, you always insert at coordinate 0, 0, 0. That's the insertion point. You always rotate, so this is the point that you insert at. You always insert with a rotation of 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, whoops, 0 seconds, always 0, 0. And the scale is always 1. We're not going to make it bigger or smaller. This is standard practice. If you go to work and you know that, you'll already impress somebody. Always bring it in at 0, 0, 0. Do not rotate it, do not scale. Okay? And if the person who created the file you're going to insert is using the same coordinate system that you are, it should fall right into place. When it doesn't, it causes problems beyond the scope of what we're trying to do right now. Okay? These are geo-referenced. So if I go back to here, I want to make sure my insertion point is, turn that off, is 0, 0, 0. My scale is 0, 0, is 1, right? I don't want to stretch it X, Y, or Z, it's all 1. And my rotation, don't turn this off, make sure it's angle 0. so let's go through that. There's only one setting you need to change. I insert. Use this, that triple dot button is called ellipsis. So use the ellipsis button. Navigate again to your desktop under course code, under downloads, under module 1. If you don't see it, change the file type to DXF. Choose the file. That's the same for everybody. The plan layout is the same. The elevations are different. Okay? So everybody uses the same file. Say open. And before you bring it in, make sure all of these are off. So you use the defaults. Bring it in at XYZ000. Scale 1 for all 3 axes and rotation 0. Okay, so make sure everything here is off. There it is. If you double click on it, it'll bring it into the drawing. So double click. Everything should fall into place. So if you zoom in, see, it's in the wrong spot. What do you see there? It's in the wrong spot, and it's too small. So this is something really mindful of. Just check my board. This is 0. This meters. Okay. I'll try to insert. This file. Well, no, it should go to 000. It's all off. Just make sure. Oh, see that? Unit conversion. So I get screwed by a different conversion. So, you know what the problem is here? The other drawing is in feet, not meters. They don't match. So it's actually converted from feet to meters, and that's why it's smaller. So here's what we need to do. You'll all have to do this, unfortunately. I'm going to open the DXF file and change the units. This is a good listen. So I'm going to open the DXF file. It's just like a drawing. And if I type in DE units, you'll see it's not meters, it's in feet. So even though I didn't want to scale it manually, it scaled it based on the unit difference. So instead of here, DE units, it says feet. So I'm going to change it to meters. Now both drawings are in meters. And it's just the unit setting. It really doesn't scale anything in the drawing. It's just the setting. It knows that 1 unit is 1 meter. Save that. And so you can save it as a DXF again. Just overwrite the file. So overwrite that file as a DXF. Save it. Say yes. Close it. You save it once, and then we can go back to here and insert it. It should work. So let's try to insert. Everything's good. Pick the file. You should be able to insert it. Might ask me to overwrite it because it's already there. Oh. Sorry, I'm going to do a glitch here. First glitch of the semester. It won't be the last, I promise. Now let me purge it up. So let me insert it again. So do not insert it first. You have to fix that setting in the other drawing first. Make sure that the other drawing is also in meters. And then when you bring it in, it should fall right into place. And if you didn't explode it before, you can explode it now. So now you'll see it's connected all the dots, or most of them. So let's look at the center line. was trying to insert the previous DXF from internally to the file instead of the external one. I don't know why. Okay. So if you bring that in, before you bring it in, you should change the unit settings of the DXF first. It has to match meters to meters. Otherwise, it'll apply a unit conversion from feet to meters or meters to feet. So DD units, that's the command, DD units. Make sure this says meters. Open up the DXF and make sure that it also says meters. Save it and then come back and insert it here. Okay. So what you'll see now is a layer here, and that point layer here. Right? So now I've got all the dots connected. And you'll see the vertices of the PDF are exactly born from where the points are. It's just connected the dots. Okay. And then all the other items. Well, anything that's got a linear association. So I've got center line of road, edge of pavement, shoulder. You can see that through it. Alright, so that's what it looks like. So these lines now represent how the points are related, right? This point is connected to this point, is connected to this point, and so on. Okay? These polylines actually represent what's called break lines or fault lines. You might have heard these terms. A break line and a fault line can be used for the triangulation on a surface. So to create a surface, go back to here. To create a surface, you need point information. And you can create different styles for it and so on. To create a digital terrain model for a surface. You need point information, which I think we've all seen, and you also need what's called break lines. You don't always get them, but if you have them, you should use them. And I'll show you what they do in a moment. Okay, so points and break lines. Those are the two. That's fundamental. Without points, you can't build a surface. Break lines, if you have them, you should use them. And the last thing is a boundary, but we'll talk about that later. So what are break lines? What do they do? Well, let's go through this mental exercise. Let's look at 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. Suppose the elevation here is 100. The elevation here is 102. The elevation here is 100. And the elevation here is 102. So there's 4 points. When you create a surface, choose the latest one. Okay, sorry. So when we're creating a surface, remember digital terrain model? The type of digital terrain model is called a TIN. And you'll remember from your highway course, TIN or TIN stands for Triangulated Irregular Network. Right? Triangulated Irregular Network. Triangles, I think you'll see when you create a surface, you'll see a series of triangles, network, a whole bunch of triangles together. Irregular. What's irregular about the TIN, or the surface, is that the connecting of the points is not necessarily based in reality. What it looks at is it tries to connect a point to its closest neighbor. Okay? So in these 4 points, it'll connect the dots, and then it'll create a triangle, right? Triangles. So for those 4 points, that's one solution for the surface. If that's the triangulation you get when you create a surface from just those points, then if we look at a cross section, let's look at a cross section through here. I want to draw that cross section. What's the elevation of these 3 points? What's the elevation of this point here? Anybody? You can interpolate between. Anybody else? Yeah, so this is 101. What's the elevation of this point? Yeah, that's right, 101. And what's the elevation of this point? Again, you're going to interpolate between. Right, so this one's going to be 102. So if you draw that cross section, you'll see it's 101, 102, 101. It's going to be low, high, low. That's what the cross section looks like. Everybody agree? Does that make sense? That's what you should see in that section. Okay, so now I'm going to look at a different solution for the triangulation. Instead of doing this diagonal, what if the solution was this? What if we get rid of this? the elevation of those 3 points be now? What's the elevation here? 101, correct. Whoops, 101. What's the elevation here? 101. What's the elevation here? 100, exactly. So it's 101, 100, 101. It's going to be low in the middle. So the way that the points are connected on this triangulated irregular network is going to be significant. You're going to have different 3D shape depending on how it triangulates. Okay? Now, when you're considering features that are linear in nature, like the center line of a road, or the edge of pavement, or the edge of shoulder, or the center line of a ditch, the 2 edges of a stream, anything like that, you want them to be connected in sequence. So whatever the computer decides based on its irregular nature isn't going to be enough. Okay? If you know what the relationship between those points should be, what the triangulation should be, you can force it to behave the way you know it should. So you can actually create a surface of points, fine, but then say, okay, these points are connected in sequence. And that's what a break line does. Okay? So all the points in this drawing that connects dots to other dots should be defined for as break lines, so that you don't get what the computer thinks the triangulation solutions should be, you get what you expect it to be. So if it should have been low in the middle, then it should have triangulated by connecting these 2 dots, right? If it should have been high in the middle, then the solution should be this one. Okay? But the solution that the computer will employ is whichever diagonal is shorter. It tries to connect points to its closest neighbors first. Okay? That's kind of the principle of break. It's strictly a mathematical principle. It's not rooted in reality. By defining break lines, you're kind of starting to give it a realistic shape. Okay, so that's what break lines do. So when you're creating a surface, you tell it the points. Generally, in this case, you're going to select all the point groups. You're going to tell it what break lines to use, anything that has dots connected. So there's a few exceptions. In this drawing here, there's some sewers. You see sanitary sewer, storm sewer. Let me turn off, let me just go. There are no points associated with the storm, sanitary, and water main. This stuff here doesn't have points. They're just lines in the drawing. There's no elevations. Okay? But if you look at the center line of the road, well, it connects the dots at the points, the edge of pavement, and so on. So when you're defining break lines for this assignment, you can use all polylines except anything related to sanitary, storm, water. There are no points associated with this. So turn those layers off, and then you can select everything that's left over. Okay. Oops, I ran off the page, sorry. Sand, storm, and water. And this is polylines. Sorry, out of space. So if I go back to my drawing, you'll see, let me turn off all the points really quickly so you can see the lines. There are no points associated with the storm sewer, or the sanitary sewer, or the water main stuff. So anything related to those, you can turn them off. Everything else is a break line. So this information, these are all the break lines, right? One way of doing it is if you go to the layers. So if I go to layer control, turn everything on. So the T-dash water main, now this is where it gets confusing. Anything that's labeled T-dash are actually the lines, believe it or not. So let me select all. T-dash center line. Are actually the layers that have the lines on them. So there's all your lines. The ones you don't want to include, if you go to those T-dash layers, you don't want to include anything related to water main. So all 4 of those layers you don't need. Anything related to storm, you don't need. Anything related to sanitary, those you can turn off. All the other T-dash layers should be used as break lines, but not the service layers, not sand, not storm, not water. So this will actually tell the surface, and connect the dots in sequence. All right, so that's plenty of work for next week. I'm not going to build the surface yet. What I want you to do for homework for next week, because we're getting closer. Remember, this is due. I have 4 classes to teach you the rest of this, and it's due on Friday, right? So we meet on Tuesday, Wednesday, and we have a class. We're going to meet Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it's due on Friday, right? So 4 more hours. For homework, what I want you to do is this. Make sure you do PDF 0, we should have done together. Okay, set up drawing. I'll have a topo file by now. Make sure you do 1, 2, and 3, and then put your points 4. Okay, so if you can get all that done, and maybe even import the points when I import the breakpoint, but I will cover that again next week. But this is really the crux of it. Create your description keys, create your styles for points and point labels, create your point groups, and then import your points. If you can have all that ready in your top file for next class, then we can build the surface and look at the rest of the requirements. What I'd like to do is finish teaching during the next class and have a work period on Wednesday before the assignment's actually due. Okay, I will post the assignment, so details of this assignment I'll show you here. I'll post this document. You have to create the topo drawing, program the description keys, create the styles, point label style, and then the group, the specific code. Use the PDFs as a guide. These are the different point styles you need to create. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the point label styles. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the point groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then here's the set of instructions. Import from the CSV file, insert the DXF file, create a new layer, and some detailed instructions here. I'll go through this file in detail next week, but certainly what I described here is plenty to have ready for next week. Okay? But I will post this. If you want to read it and try doing some of this, I will describe it in more detail on today. But this is all due next week. Okay? It's due next Friday. The recording should be available in a few hours, tomorrow for sure. Okay. Just I'm going to stop recording now. Yeah. So it'll be there. So